And it looks like we are live. Hey, everybody, this is Ed Espinoza with Progress, Texas. We are here with our K-8 video series on Thursday afternoon. And joining me today is State Senator Royce West from Dallas. Hi, Senator.
How are you doing, Ed?
I'm good. And thank you for being here with us. Really appreciate it. There is a lot going on in the world, and no doubt a lot going on in your campaign right now. And I know that time is precious. So it means a lot that you're able to join us and our viewers today.
My pleasure.
So, Senator, you and I first met back when I was a staffer at the DNC. This is 10, 12 years ago now. And you have a long record of public service. So for those who may just be getting involved in politics or maybe just following this campaign this year, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started, when you arrived at the Senate, and what that career has looked like?
Okay, sure, Ed. I've been a state senator now for 27 years. Prior to becoming a state senator, I was a lawyer. I am still a lawyer, but I was in the Dallas County District Attorney's Office and became the first African-American chief felony prosecutor. Then I ran for the district attorney's job, was the Democratic nominee. Dallas turned red that year. So I ended up running for the state Senate in 1993 and have been the state senator from the Dallas area since that time. And during my tenure as a state senator, we turned Dallas back blue. And one of the persons that I hired in the district attorney's office is now the district attorney at Dallas County.
Excellent. Well, definitely a long career of public service. And over that time, you are serving in the state Senate. So 27 years, I guess that amounts out to 14 legislative sessions. And now today, you are running for the United States Senate. But before we dive into that, I want to ask you personally, with everything that's going on in the world, how are you doing? How's your family doing? And what keeps you grounded during these moments like this? And by the way, I'm sure that you've seen many of these in your time of service.
No, I haven't. In terms of a pandemic, this is the first worldwide pandemic of this magnitude that
Fair
I've
enough.
seen.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you have 44 million Americans out of work. I mean, Depression era numbers. And then the number of deaths that have been caused by this virus and the do nothing attitude of the president of the United States. I've never seen anything like this. When you really begin to think about it, that issue, the COVID issue, plus the racial unrest, seeing George Floyd killed on television, and now Mr. Brooks being shot in the back down in Atlanta, more and more people are beginning to see, and frankly, these issues are being exposed more and more. And I know that your viewers, your listeners will join with me and basically say, yes, Black Lives Matter, and we're going to have structural change in this country.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. It's definitely a first. These are unprecedented times, which you've no doubt heard many times over the last few weeks, few months. And unfortunately, the leadership of our state hasn't gotten us to where we need to be. And I think that brings us to your current situation now, running for U.S. Senate, looking to be part of the new leadership that this state has. In running for Senate and transitioning from state to federal leadership, what has led you to this decision? What's your driving force today? And on top of all that, how has the pandemic affected campaigning?
Well, let me be very specific in answering your questions. When I begin to look at the reason to run for the United States Senate, John Cornyn is no longer representing the interests of the state of Texas. Texas has been red for 25, 30 years since Ann Richards. And it's time for change in Texas. And I've readied myself to be the United States Senate. I've done the work necessary as a Democrat in the Democratic Party. I'm the only true Democrat in this particular race. I've worked as a member of the Democratic State Executive Committee, the DNC. I've worked to make sure the candidates got elected as Democrats. And again, I turned Dallas County blue. And the reason that I'm running is because this country is so divided. We've never seen it this divided. And you're going to need someone that has the skill set and experience to make sure you bring it back together without sacrificing democratic principles. And that's exactly what I'll do.
Now, in all of the campaigns that you have run, this one has got to be so different with the pandemic.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What's changed? What are the main changes in your campaign this time?
Well, the primary, I was able to. I started on July 22nd, working towards the primary, and then I got into the runoff. But then I had to take the whole campaign and put it on pause because I am a state senator, and I had to discharge my responsibilities as a state senator. So I stopped fundraising. At campaign, the staff was just kind of on pause, not really doing anything because I wasn't giving directions to them. And the reality is that my constituents expected me to be there to make certain that they were able to navigate the maze of stimulus funding, unemployment claims, healthcare claims, treating claims, all of those things I had to do. And so it wasn't until, frankly, and then not being able to get out amongst the 254 counties and talk to persons in the state of Texas, the whole environment changed. And so we're now doing everything virtual. And so around mid-April, that's when I changed to being able to do state Senate functions and still be able to get back into the campaign and begin putting together a dash to the finish line.
Well, you are definitely coming in strong at the close of this runoff campaign. You've proved a lot of people wrong, including myself on many occasions. And I got to say, it's really impressive what you've done so far. And I know that it's going to be impressive going down to the finish. I've got a few questions for you that I want to get into about healthcare, state leadership, community. But the one that I want to start with is an item that might be on many people's minds the most right now, which is police brutality, police accountability, police funding, and of course, George Floyd, as you mentioned a few moments ago. Witnessing the murder of Floyd, who was a Houston native, at the hands of police in Minneapolis, a lot of local Texas communities are now discussing how to end police violence. One of the things that has come up quite a bit is that under Texas law, police officers are not required to turn over any evidence found in their investigation. That is one of several state laws. I know that qualified immunity is another issue that's come up. Speaking as somebody who is a state legislator and has such a depth of experience in these areas, can you tell us a little bit about your opinions and what you think can realistically be done moving forward to help mitigate these issues?
Well, I'm glad in the state of Texas that the governor has spoken out on this particular issue. When you begin to look at what's going on in Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus is coming up with a bill that would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants and things of that nature, and also look at standards in terms of trainings, and also putting together a commission, I shouldn't say a commission, but also putting together a list of police officers, specifically gypsy cops that go from one location to the other when they've had disciplinary issues or they've resigned in anticipation of being found at fault in terms of disciplinary issues. And so I think those are good recommendations. And the Senate is now coming out. So that's a good sign when you have both the House and the Senate working on this issue. I still think that there are other things that we need to do. It makes no sense to me, Ed, that we have a multitude of laws across this country that says when deadly force can be utilized by police officers. We should have one law in this country,
standard.
One standard in this country, and make it applicable to all of the states. That would be, believe it or not, that would be a Herculean challenge in order to get that done. But it's the right thing to do. And when you begin to think about some of the other issues, hate crimes, we have one here in Texas. If a police officer is motivated when he kills someone by hate of that person because of his race, his ethnicity, then that officer should be tried under the hate crime statutes of this state. And you know what that means? Punishment would be enhanced. When you begin to think about police departments, we should have standard policies across this country in terms of the use of deadly force. I don't understand why we have variations. I think those are some of the things that we need to get done. You had another part to the question that I forgot what you asked. Do you recall?
I think the other part of the question was, well, actually what I was leading up to was things that can be done to address it. You had a bill in the last legislative session, SB 2114, to help change many of these things. It was never voted on by the House, which kind of begs the questions, what is the resistance to these changes, and how can people possibly justify that resistance? And what
Well,
can we do to push through it?
let me just make sure that the viewers understand exactly what we were attempting to do. We were trying to make certain that police departments turned over all of the evidence to the district attorney's office if they're going to file a case, and that they would certify that all the evidence has been turned over, as opposed to them holding evidence back. And then if they certified that, then we know that they are on the line. If for some reason they're lying about it, that they could be subject to prosecution for falsification of a government document, as an example. Okay? But we were able to pass it out of the Senate with bipartisan support. But for some strange reason, the law enforcement office unions decided to block it in the House, and we weren't able to pass it. Hopefully, it'll be passed during the next legislative session.
I want to move on from current events, and we talked about this briefly at the get-go here, but what you've seen protests in the past, historically, 1965, 1998, with the World Trade Organization, 1992 in my hometown of LA, where we had the Rodney King riots. In your opinion, how do the protests that we're seeing now, and not just in Texas but around the country, how do these protests compare to others we've seen in the past?
I think they're more diverse. I think that the fact is that back in 1982, yes, we saw that clip of Rodney King being beaten by those police officers. But the fact is, this time around, we have so much social media now. Everyone has an iPhone and have access to a wealth of content on social media. And what has happened on this, Ed, is that the parents, the grandparents, the children, and the grandchildren saw exactly what happened to Mr. Floyd. And everyone's incensed about that. And a lot of people said, I didn't know this happened. Yes, it's been happening for a long time. And people now, like not before, have come together. This is what, 22 days now of protests in this country? 22 consecutive days. There's protests going on in this country. And people want to see change, and change is occurring. But what I would say to you is this: in Texas, I want you to continue to do what you're doing in terms of protesting. Let's not give them an excuse to come in with tear gas, rubber bullets, bean bags, and all those things. Let's make certain that there's no destruction of property. Make certain you use your First Amendment right and keep the pressure on. We need to take the energy that is being developed by these protests and focus them with laser certainty on the tools that we need in order to make change. And the biggest tool that we can use is voting during this particular runoff and also in November. That's what we need to do. If we have the stamina, young people, to stay there until November so we can get Trump out of there, get Corning out of there, you'll begin to see change.
Yeah, absolutely. State Senator Royce West, candidate for U.S. Senate. If you're just joining us, a few questions from Facebook that I want to share with you now, Senator.
Okay.
One is, what steps would you take to shape a new police? What would policing look like in a new era? And similarly, would you be willing to reopen police brutality cases in Texas to make sure that they were handled correctly?
Well, let me start with the latter. I'd say yes. And then the other piece is this: to the extent that we have had police officers found guilty of those types of infractions, we need to also go back and look at the cases that they filed to see whether or not they were lying about evidence or didn't give the district attorney different types of what we call Brady evidence that would make certain that show that a person did not commit the crime. Okay, so we need to go back and look at not only the brutality cases, but also cases those police officers filed. You asked me, what would a police department look like? I believe in government, local government closer to the people is best for the people. That needs to be an individual decision in terms of how you want to see your police department. I think that we've got to make certain we understand what the core function of police officers should be. And then those ancillary functions need to be given to persons outside the police department to the extent necessary in order to make them become more efficient and more effective.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I want to, now that we're about halfway through the interview, I want to make sure that we're balancing our time correctly. So I want to transition, even though this is a very important subject, to another subject that has been very important in our community, and that is the coronavirus and the impact that the pandemic has had not only on Texas, but on our nation as a whole. And specifically as it relates to healthcare, which, as you know, has been its own crisis in Texas for a very long time. With so many Texans having lost healthcare during all of this, especially if they've lost work, what could state and federal officials do now that can help these families and the people who need it, bring help to people when they need it?
Well, I think a few things. Number one, when we see that people are losing their health care, let's just say it's a pandemic again, and the World Health Organization, which we need to rejoin, as opposed to sitting on the sideline with a whining, we need to rejoin the World Health Organization and hold them accountable to the extent that we need to have changes there, we make those changes. But if a pandemic is declared, we should make certain that the Affordable Health Care Act is opened up so persons will be able to get insurance, those that are losing insurance. To the extent a person cannot afford that, then we recognize that they're uninsured. We have not expanded Medicaid in the state of Texas, and that we're going to have to make certain that hospitals that end up becoming the primary care providers have the resources necessary in order to service those persons. That's what needs to be done. We need to also make certain, as a result of this pandemic, that we begin to repatriate, if you will, Ed, the manufacturing of our drugs here in the country. And not only that, but also our equipment. We know that China and India and other countries that we've had to go to in order to get that equipment, they said, wait a minute. We've got to make certain the people here in China are okay first, which you can't blame them for that. And so we've got to repatriate those types of services and then make certain that what we do from an employment standpoint is try to locate those manufacturers in urban centers and also rural centers within the country by providing tax incentives. As we begin to look at the employment issue, we need to make certain that those persons in line that are not being rehired get an opportunity to participate in some of the training programs, many of which are going on right now, to be honest with you, community colleges. You get 6 months, you get a certification, and there are jobs in the healthcare industry, there's jobs in the technology industry, and other industries also right now in the state of Texas. And so they may not be in the city that you're currently living in, but they're in the state of Texas. And lastly, as we begin to look at issues concerning green energy and moving to the green economy, there are a lot of great jobs that are being developed or already in that particular economy. And so persons need to be looking towards that, like windmill technicians, as an example, are making about $55,000, $60,000 a year.
Along the lines of state leadership and opportunity, things that you've mentioned, the state leaders are really the ones who guide people to the options that you just mentioned, but they also lead through their actions. And namely with Governor Greg Abbott and John Cornyn, Abbott has really been hesitant to have any kind of restrictions. We've seen the things not allowing cities to enforce mask ordinances. John Cornyn making jokes about the pandemic with coronavirus early on. A lot of them misleading Texans and ignoring some of the common sense health and safety measures. How do you think we can address this at the state level, and what should Texans be doing right now to ensure their health and safety at this point?
Well, this is the balance that you have to do. We've got to figure out how to make certain we maintain public health as the dominant priority while we're still opening up the economy. We have to open up the economy in order for people to go to work, for us to be able to get sales taxes to provide government services. There's only so much that we're going to be able to get from the federal government that now has a deficit of over $20 trillion. But there's only going to be so much that we're going to be able to do. Yes, we should have one more stimulus package, for certain, but we've got to make certain that the monies that have been appropriated in these stimulus packages have gone to the right place.
Yeah.
In terms of the issue of reopening and healthcare, I've always been a person that believes in government closer to the people is best for the people. And so to the extent that you have county judges, as an example, mayors that believe it's in their best interest to have different types of COVID virus solutions consistent with the CDC, then we ought to be able to do that too. But it's a delicate balance. You know, we hadn't been here before. And so you've got to make certain that you use the best talent available, experts available, in order to make the best choices that we can to benefit public health first and opening up of the community, a business community second.
We have another viewer question here along the lines of Governor Abbott and state leadership. And the specific question is, how do you feel about Governor Abbott reopening the schools come the fall semester? I'll repeat that. Governor Abbott reopening the schools come fall.
Well, you know, we're going to have to reopen the schools, but we've got to figure out what reopening the schools actually mean. That's why you've got to look at, and several different options are being considered right now. Having a flex schedule like you normally have in college, making certain that those students that don't have devices end up being the first ones in, and that they're exercising the different requirements of CDC, as an example. And we're beginning to see right now what the problem is going to be. You take some of the recent reports concerning students participating in UIL activities, they're testing positive right now. And what does that mean in terms of this school year? So if a student tests positive in a classroom, does that shut down the entire school or classroom? And so we're gonna have to feel our way through this, Texans. I'm gonna tell you that now. There is no magic solution to this problem. But again, if we have our local school districts, and many of them right now through their boards of trustees are looking at these issues, grappling with these issues to figure out what's the best solution in order to make certain that we don't have a gap in education and that we are allowing students to go back. The other issue is this right here. Let's just say that a classroom or a school closes down. Then a parent has to stay home again. That issue, and have to stay home from work. What happens in that situation? And so there are a lot of different scenarios that we have to find answers to. And I believe that working with the governor, working with myself as a state senator and locally, we'll find the solutions to it.
It's definitely not going to be easy. And one thing's for sure, we may not know what it's going to look like, but it's going to look a lot different than what we have been used to. Another question for you. You have mentioned a couple of times that the government that is closest to the people is the best. And that takes me to one of our last questions here. I only have a few more left. And that is, what are you seeing needed in Texas communities right now? So when you go out and you're doing your work, helping people connect to services and such, what is it you're hearing the most that people are in need of?
A job, okay? If I'm in urban Texas, if I'm in rural Texas, connectivity, okay?
Yeah.
If I'm in suburban Texas, opening up the economy. Those are the things that I'm hearing. I'm also hearing, obviously, we need change as it relates to our criminal justice system to make certain that we don't have these issues concerning racism in America. And again, my friends, Black Lives Matter. And we've got to make certain that police know that and everyone else knows that. And we do what we need to do to make certain that that African Americans are given the opportunities that everyone else are given.
You know, you mentioned criminal justice, and that brings up a question that one of our viewers have asked. What is your stance on marijuana legalization and decriminalization, especially with the history of its impact on Black and brown citizenry?
I mean, possession of marijuana, I'm in favor of decriminalization of it. And implicit within decriminalization is legalization.
Yeah. Good. Do you think we should have a special session?
No, we don't need a special session because this is what happens. We're within 6 months of session in Texas. I think the issue of police reform should be an emergency item that's taken up within the first 90 days of the session. I think these 6 months we should be figuring out how to pull Democrats and Republicans together to come up with a set of reform packages, reform recommendations, and put them into a package to be considered as soon as the legislature convenes.
Very good. I only have one question left, and that is, in all of this, what is something that you're looking forward to? We talked earlier about things that ground you and really kind of help you see through this. What are you looking forward to? And do you have any final words for our viewers?
Sure. I'm looking forward to a new chapter in my life representing you in the United States Senate, to be able to bring together coalitions based on interest in order to get things done here in Texas. I want to make certain that I represent your values. John Cornyn has failed miserably at changing with time, frankly. And when you begin to look at my record, you'll see that I have been changing with time and making certain that I stay grounded in terms of things that need to get done in the state of Texas, creating universities, dealing with issues concerning criminal justice, body camera, dash camera, things like that are things that I've done. Education, creating universities, and not only universities, but also law schools. And when you begin to look at healthcare, I've been on the front line trying to make certain we expand Medicaid here in the state of Texas and provide different options for persons who want to have quality healthcare. You can be assured that when I become your United States Senator, healthcare will be my number one issue. Healthcare should be a fundamental right to all persons. Criminal justice will be right behind that. Obviously, I've been working on women issues since I've been a state senator. Ask Cecile Richards as an example. We used to be with Planned Parenthood. Ask her where Royce West has been on Planned Parenthood related issues. Ask Wendy Davis where Royce West has been on women related issues, immigration issues, climate change issues, voting issues. Royce West has been there. And so the question becomes this: do you want a true Democrat, a person that's been involved and committed to the party, to represent you in Washington? My friends, I've readied myself to be your next United States Senator. And the reality is, if you help, we will no longer, as Democrats, be a victim of history. We'll make history and put in place a blueprint that will be used by others to win statewide races. Thank you very much. And hopefully Royce will be your choice. You can go to roycewest.com to get additional information.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This was really informative. I've really enjoyed it. I know that our viewers did as well. And I know this will not be the last that we're seeing of you. And I wish you best of luck down the road. We'll see you soon.
Ed, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Senator.
Remember, Royce is your choice.